The intake procedures at Nexus Coliseum were normally a straightforward affair. Contestants arrived with their bioenhancement documentation, underwent compatibility scans to ensure their modifications wouldn't damage the arena's quantum field generators, and submitted to psychological evaluations designed to weed out anyone unstable enough to pose a threat to the paying customers. Mika's processing had taken 6 hours. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to explain this again," said Registration Officer Veltar, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he reviewed her documentation for the 8th time. "According to these readings, you have no bioenhancements, no genetic modifications, no cybernetic implants, and no augmented reflexes. Are you certain you're in the right place?" "Look, buddy," Mika replied, leaning against the counter with the patience of someone who'd spent a lot of time dealing with bureaucracy. "I didn't volunteer for this. Earth got assigned a mandatory participation slot in your little gladiator show, the selection committee picked names out of a hat, and here we are. Trust me, I'd rather be back on Jupiter Station fixing atmospheric processors." Veltar consulted his terminal again, his mandibles clicking with confusion. "But you're registered as a Class 5 Deathworlder. Your planet is classified as extremely hazardous by 17 different safety councils." "Yeah, well, that's because everything on Earth is trying to kill everything else, including us. Doesn't mean we're particularly good at it compared to, actual engineered murder machines." The registration process had eventually been completed through the simple expedient of filing Mika under exotic contestant review pending and hoping the legal department could sort it out later. The betting markets had opened with odds of 50,001 against her surviving the opening ceremony, and most bookmakers were treating wagers on her as charitable donations to the Widows and Orphans Fund. The Colosseum's structure defied conventional understanding of architecture, engineering, and occasionally physics. Its central arena occupied a space larger than most space stations, surrounded by viewing galleries that spiraled upward like the inside of a Nautilus shell. The quantum field generators embedded in the arena floor could simulate any environment from Arctic tundra to the surface of a neutron star, while force field projectors ensured that spectator safety was maintained even when contestants were busy reducing each other to subatomic particles. For championship matches, the arena was configured in its most basic setting, a simple circular platform surrounded by energy barriers that could contain explosions large enough to be seen from orbit. The lack of environmental hazards was considered sporting, allowing contestants to focus entirely on dismembering each other without worrying about lava flows or gravitational anomalies. The pre-fight ceremonies began with the traditional Parade of Excellence, where each contestant demonstrated their species' particular approach to organized mayhem. The festivities opened with Thyrakesh the Bone Render, representing the cybernetic warriors of Sigma Draconis. His demonstration involved systematically destroying a series of increasingly durable target drones using weapon systems that had been surgically integrated into his skeletal structure. Next came Zephyr Prime, a collective intelligence inhabiting 17 different biomechanical bodies simultaneously. Their performance involved splitting into individual units, each one performing combat maneuvers that would have required separate physics equations to explain, before recombining into a single entity that moved like liquid death, having a particularly good day. The crowd's enthusiasm built through each successive demonstration, reaching near hysteria when Krex'oth took the arena for his traditional display of dominance. The champion's bioelectrical systems began charging with a sound like distant thunder, energy cascading along his chitinous armor in patterns that hurt to look at directly. He raised all 4 arms toward the arena's apex, channeling power through bioconduits that had taken centuries to evolve, building to a crescendo that culminated in a focused plasma discharge that turned a military-grade combat drone into a brief, very bright star. The spectators went absolutely insane, their cheers registering on seismic monitors throughout the station. Then it was Mika's turn. She walked into the arena with the unhurried pace of someone heading to work on a Monday morning, looked around at the screaming crowd with mild interest, and proceeded to perform what could generously be called stretching exercises. She rolled her shoulders, flexed her fingers, and checked her wrist chronometer, as if she had somewhere else to be. The crowd's cheering faded to confused murmuring. The commentary team, A trio of enhanced journalists whose job required them to provide continuous analysis during combat events found themselves at a loss for words. "Is she warming up?" asked Commentator Prime. "Perhaps this is some form of psychological warfare unknown to our databases," suggested Commentator Secondary. Commentator Tertiary, who had covered 47 championship matches and thought he'd seen everything, simply stared. "I am genuinely uncertain whether we're witnessing advanced strategy or complete ignorance of the situation." Mika finished her stretching routine, walked to the center of the arena and stood perfectly still. The silence that followed was the kind that made people check their life support systems to make sure they were still breathing. After witnessing the elaborate displays of technological superiority and bioengineered lethality, watching someone just stand there felt like a glitch in reality. The Colosseum's governing board huddled in emergency conference. According to regulations established over 4 millennia of combat entertainment, each contestant was required to demonstrate their combat capabilities during the pre-fight ceremonies. Mika had technically fulfilled this requirement by not spontaneously exploding, but it hardly seemed to capture the spirit of the thing. After considerable debate involving 17 different legal precedents and a consultation with the AI consciousness that managed the tournament brackets, they decided to proceed. The human had filled out the appropriate paperwork, submitted to the required medical scans, and hadn't actually violated any rules. If she wanted to commit elaborate suicide in front of a galactic audience, well, it wouldn't be the first time someone had underestimated the competition. The championship match was scheduled for the following rotation cycle, giving the galaxy's most sophisticated civilizations 24 standard hours to place increasingly desperate bets and debate the implications of a baseline Deathworlder facing an apex champion. The scientific community was having a field day. Xenobiologists from across the Dominion submitted papers analyzing the possible hidden advantages of unmodified human physiology. Military strategists postulated that Earth might have developed stealth enhancement technologies so advanced they were undetectable by conventional scanning methods. Philosophers debated whether the human's apparent confidence indicated knowledge of secret techniques or simply a death wish. Krex'oth, for his part, was not concerned. He'd reviewed recordings of every documented human combat engagement over the past 3 centuries and found nothing that posed a threat to someone of his capabilities. Humans were small, weak, and slow. Their reaction times were measured in fractions of seconds rather than microseconds. Their bone density was laughably inadequate, their muscle fiber efficiency was primitive, and their nervous systems processed information at speeds that would embarrass a basic calculator. Whatever the human was planning, it wouldn't matter. The laws of physics were absolute, and physics favored the strong. The arena was packed beyond capacity for the championship match. Beings had traveled from across the galaxy to witness what everyone assumed would be the final demonstration of Deathworlder delusion. The betting markets had stabilized at 75,001 against the human, though a few contrarian speculators had begun placing small wagers on the other side, apparently for the novelty value. The pre-fight rituals were more elaborate than usual, befitting a championship match that had generated more media attention than the last 3 tournaments combined. Krex'oth entered the arena to thunderous applause, his bioelectrical systems crackling with barely contained energy. He performed his traditional power display, channeling force through neural pathways that had been optimized for maximum intimidation value, building to a crescendo that made the arena's structural supports vibrate in harmonic resonance. The crowd's enthusiasm reached levels that required the station's acoustic dampeners to prevent actual hearing damage. Mika entered from the opposite side, still wearing the same work clothes she'd arrived in. She walked to a designated position with the same unhurried pace she'd displayed throughout the previous day's ceremonies, looked around the arena with polite interest, and stood still. The crowd's noise level dropped to a whisper, then to complete silence. Experience had taught them to pay attention during these moments of apparent inactivity. The referee, a quantum construct programmed with the combat knowledge of every known species, initiated the standard pre-match protocols. It scanned both contestants for prohibited equipment, confirmed their biological signatures, and began the traditional countdown that had preceded 4 millennia of organized violence. "Contestants, acknowledge readiness for combat," the referee announced. its voice echoing through the arena with harmonic frequencies designed to penetrate even the most heavily armored audio receptors. Krex'oth lowered himself into a combat stance that distributed his considerable mass across all 6 legs, while positioning his 4 arms for optimal striking angles. Bioelectrical energy began building along his exoskeleton as he prepared to launch himself forward with enough force to crater the arena floor. Mika shifted her weight slightly from one foot to the other. 10, 9, 8. The champion's charging systems reached optimal levels, energy cascading through bioconduits in patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't so terrifying. 7, 6, 5. Mika checked her chronometer again and seemed mildly surprised by what she saw. 4, 3, 2. Krex'oth's muscles coiled with the potential energy of a compressed spring, every fiber of his being focused on the moment of release. Begin combat. The reigning champion of the Celestial Dominion exploded into motion, crossing the arena in a blur of chitinous fury and accumulated momentum. His trajectory was mathematically perfect, his timing flawless, his technique refined by 9 seasons of championship-level combat. Bioelectrical discharges trailed behind him like the tail of a comet, leaving ionized particles in the air. Nothing in the known galaxy could stop him. Mika waited until he was 18 inches away, stepped slightly to her left, grabbed his leading arm and used his own momentum to throw him over her shoulder. The laws of physics, which had seemed so firmly on Krex'oth's side, suddenly decided to demonstrate their complete indifference to bioengineering, genetic modification, and 4 million years of evolutionary optimization. The champion's considerable mass, moving at considerable speed, encountered an immovable pivot point and proceeded to describe a perfect parabolic arc through the arena's atmosphere. Krex'oth the Annihilator, terror of 12-star systems, pinnacle of Zartec engineering, undefeated champion of the most prestigious combat tournament in known space, hit the arena's force field barrier with a sound like a crystal cathedral being dropped from orbit. The impact registered on seismic monitors 3 decks away and caused several spectators in the upper galleries to spill their refreshments. He bounced once, twitched twice, and lay still. The arena fell silent, except for the gentle hum of life support systems and the distant sound of someone's beverage container hitting the floor in one of the premium seating areas. Mika dusted off her hands, walked to the center of the arena, and looked up at the referee construct with the patient expression of someone waiting for a delayed transport. "Winner, Terra Representative Mika Thornfield," announced the referee, its quantum consciousness struggling to process what had just occurred. The silence stretched for another few seconds before someone in the upper galleries began to applaud. The sound spread like a slow-moving wave through the crowd, until the entire arena was filled with the thunderous approval of beings who had just witnessed the impossible happen in real time. Mika accepted the championship trophy from a thoroughly confused official, declined the traditional victory interview on the grounds that she needed to catch the next transport back to Jupiter Station, and asked the nearest security guard where she could find decent coffee in this sector of space. The aftermath was chaos of the most entertaining variety. The Colosseum's governing board immediately launched 23 different investigations into possible rule violations, equipment malfunctions, and localized breakdowns of fundamental physical laws. Earth's diplomatic status was upgraded from hazardous death world to extremely hazardous death world within 6 hours, and several major powers began hastily revising their expansion plans to exclude the Sol system entirely. The combat analysts eventually figured out what had happened, though it took them 4 months, consultation with 16 different physics departments, and 3 nervous breakdowns among the senior research staff. The answer, when it came, was so elegantly simple, it was almost insulting. Momentum transfer. Every advanced civilization in the galaxy had spent millennia developing increasingly sophisticated approaches to combat. Cybernetic enhancements that could process information at quantum speeds, genetic modifications that turned bone into living armor, energy weapons that could punch holes through space-time itself, bioelectrical systems that channeled the fundamental forces of the universe in service of more efficient violence. None of them had bothered with the basic physics principle that governed how objects in motion responded to external forces applied at optimal angles. The humans, being too primitive to know better, had continued using techniques that predated their spaceflight capability. They'd refined them over centuries of application, certainly, but the core principles remained unchanged. Use your opponent's momentum against them, maintain your center of balance, apply force at the correct angle and timing, and let Newton's laws handle the rest. It was elegant, efficient, and completely invisible to beings who'd spent so long looking for complex solutions that they'd forgotten simple ones existed. Mika returned to Jupiter Station 4 days later, having turned down offers to teach at 26 different military academies, declining invitations to appear on 47 talk shows, and politely refusing a marriage proposal from a Rigelian prince who apparently found her technique devastatingly attractive. She'd won the championship, collected her prize money, and seen enough of galactic civilization to last several lifetimes. The trophy sat on her workbench for 2 weeks before she used it as a paperweight for equipment requisition forms. Back at the Nexus Coliseum, the next tournament was already being planned. The marketing department had drafted several new slogans: Celestial Dominion Combat, where advanced technology meets basic physics, 4 millennia of evolution versus 1 really good throw. Come for the biotechnology, stay for the momentum transfer. They eventually went with Combat Excellence Redefined. The universe, as it turned out, still had a few surprises left. It had spent billions of years watching civilizations rise and fall, develop technologies that seemed to bend reality itself, and achieve wonders that challenged the very concept of impossibility. And then, just when everyone thought they'd mastered the fundamental forces of existence, it reminded them that sometimes the most basic principles were still the most reliable ones. Somewhere on a mining station orbiting Jupiter, maintenance workers continued learning how to handle heavy equipment safely, how to redirect dangerous momentum before it could cause accidents, and how to use leverage to move objects many times their own weight. They had no idea they were being trained in techniques that could defeat the galaxy's most sophisticated warriors. They just called it good engineering practice. The Celestial Dominion had spent the better part of 4 millennia perfecting the delicate art of turning violence into profit, a pursuit that required the sort of bureaucratic genius typically reserved for tax codes and insurance policies. Their crown jewel, the Nexus Coliseum, floated serenely in the Andromeda Drift like a chrome-plated monument to the galaxy's collective bloodlust. Its quantum-stabilized superstructure, capable of hosting combat events that would make ancient gladiatorial games look like neighborhood pillow fights. The Coliseum operated under what its marketing department cheerfully called the Evolutionary Excellence Protocol, a system that ranked species according to their combat potential, using algorithms so complex they required their own dedicated AI consciousness just to keep track of the variables. At the top of this pyramid sat the apex champions, beings so thoroughly engineered for warfare that they'd transcended mere biology and entered the realm of living weapons. The current undisputed champion, a nightmare of chitinous armor and bioelectrical fury known as Krex'oth the Annihilator, represented everything the Dominion considered peak evolution. Standing 9 feet tall on 6 articulated legs, with 4 arms that ended in claws capable of slicing through battle-grade ceramics, Krex'oth belonged to the Zartek Collective, a species that had dedicated the last 2 million years to turning themselves into the galaxy's most efficient killing machine. Their approach to self-improvement made military-industrial complexes weep with envy. Every Zartek was born in bioforges that customized their physiology for specific combat roles, spent their childhood in training simulators that compressed decades of experience into months of accelerated learning, and reached adulthood already equipped with neural interfaces that could process tactical information faster than most species could blink. Krex'oth had held the championship for 9 consecutive seasons, a record that had insurance companies across 12 sectors revising their actuarial tables. His last 17 opponents had required cleanup crews rather than medical attention, and his signature finishing move involved channeling bioelectrical energy through his claws to create plasma discharges hot enough to melt tungsten. The betting pools for championship matches had long since stopped taking wagers on whether Krex'oth would win, and focused instead on how quickly his opponents would be reduced to their component atoms, which made the arrival of Earth's representative something of a cosmic joke. Mika Thornfield had disembarked from the transport shuttle, wearing clothes that wouldn't have looked out of place in a manufacturing district. Dark work pants, a jacket that had obviously seen better years, and boots designed for function rather than fashion. She carried no visible weapons, displayed no obvious cybernetic enhancements, and had the general demeanor of someone who'd been volunteered for a task she'd rather not be doing.